have a question that you don't want to ask on the webinar, or you think of something later, or you want to ask a private question, please feel free to email those questions to resilientrecovery@hud.gov. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Jessie Handforth Kome, who's the presenter today.
Hey there, this is Jessie Handforth Kome, and I'm in the room with Meg Barclay, Duncan Yetman, and Lynsey Johnson, who are all people who helped us out with the 45-day threshold review. And we got quite a few submissions. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to say exactly how many. And on reviewing them, we realized that we needed to do some more technical assistance, and that we needed to make ourselves available to grantees, applicants, so that you could ask your questions. So we scheduled this webinar today on the most impacted and distressed thresholds. They're actually individual thresholds. And on Thursday at 3 p.m., we're going to be doing a discussion of the unmet recovery need, not urgent recovery need, unmet recovery need. I see it's wrong on the web. Threshold, and walk through that. If you want to also participate in that one on Thursday, we'll be here again. Okay, we're going to do, Todd Richardson isn't here yet. We're hoping he comes, so if there's data questions, we'll hold them and deal with them with him, whatever we can't handle. We all learned a lot about data during this, though. So, a brief review, the most impacted and most distressed threshold criteria. There's already a webinar that walks through these at full length. They're covered in Appendix G of to the NOFA itself. And we're going to walk through a brief review, because we want to spend a lot of time on Q&A today, of the most impacted and distressed threshold. I have in my hand right now a copy of the technical amendment that we're about to do. I have verbal approvals on it, and we will launch it. There will be a technical amendment to Appendix G. Both the reviewers and several alert applicants pointed out some issues with the appendix that are technical that we need to fix, ranging from a missing word to some bad formatting that was confusing and things like that. And we're going to be moving that really soon. Today, because we don't have it issued, I am going to be answering questions as much as possible. As if, Todd is coming in and he has a really, really bad Christmas sweater on. And we're going to be answering questions as much as possible based on the new version. Where I have to, I'll signal to you that I'm going to answer you based on Appendix G as it stands, because that's the way the rules are, but that we are reconsidering it means it's going to be affected by the technical amendment. We're going to try to get it out in time to be up by the time we do the Q&A on Thursday. Stay tuned. Okay, let's jump forward and just take a look at the slides. If you want to ask questions at any point in the chat box, feel free to start putting them in, and Meg will be sorting Q&A box. And Meg will be sorting as we go forward so we can get started on the questions if you think of them while we're presenting. So we have three thresholds: most impacted, distressed, and unmet recovery need. If you want to think about most impacted, it's really looking at where did the disaster do damage and how much damage was done. The distressed is what are the characteristics of the most impacted area that exacerbate the effects, the impact of the disaster, and make it more difficult for that area to recover. And unmet recovery need is what need resulted from the disaster remains now in the most impacted area that you cannot meet with available resources. And in meeting these thresholds, you have to essentially answer these questions. That's what the instructions in Appendix G walk you through. And you have to support your answers with information or data exactly as it is requested in the appendix. Okay, the next one. So the most impacted and distressed thresholds, which we call MID, come directly from the appropriation, which provides that the recovery assistance has to be for recovery in the most impacted and distressed areas. And of course, we've said now that you have to address address recovery needs, not completely meet them, and that you must, that we are fine with resilience to address or protect recovery needs, and above and beyond addressing recovery needs is eligible for this funding. But there still has to be that tie back to the most impacted and distressed area and demonstrating the most impacted and distressed area. Again, Thursday we'll be talking about unmet recovery needs. We're decoupling them right now, but you have to meet all three thresholds with each area you're going to want to spend money in. So we're going to start calling that area the mid-earn, most impacted and distressed hyphen unmet recovery need, your mid-earn target area. Your greater target area, let's jump forward to another slide. Your greater target area, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, for your NDRC proposal as a whole, we do want to be larger. So, did you jump a slide? Don't do that.
Oh, I thought that.
No, stop there. I'm fine. So our allocations have to be based on the best available data, and that's why we're so insistent on the data and not just assertions. We don't have data that we want to rely on, that we think is quality for us to rely on to make allocations, but we are asking that the applicant data, the supporting data, is going to meet not necessarily the same standards that HUD uses, but good, relatively reasonably rigorous standards for qualifying as best available data. We've outlined the threshold criteria in Appendix G, as we said. If you fail, and some people have asked us, if your submission does not demonstrate unmet recovery need in a most impacted and distressed area, at least one, your application, your Phase 1 application is going to be deemed unresponsive, and we won't score it. If you get at least one through, even if you don't get all of the ones through that you proposed in Phase 1, we'll still score your application. Okay, so go ahead and jump to the next one. This was one of the big questions and one of the areas that we are going to address. In Appendix G, it moves at some points it says sub-county area. At some points it says for counties HUD has already determined, it says county, and in other places it says target area. So we're working on what is a target area. For your mid-earn, your most impacted and distressed unmet recovery need threshold, which is your Appendix G threshold and your factor response minimum for Phase 1. The target area is equal to the area you demonstrate meets the mid-earn threshold. It's at a county level when HUD designated a nationally most impacted county. It's that list in Appendix G that's called the MIC tab, the most impacted county tab. Or it must be at the sub-county level for all other declared counties, and that's the declared counties by disaster tab in NOFA Appendix B. We're not going to be considering for the mid-earn threshold for where you can spend the grant money non-declared counties. But your proposal overall can have a proposal target area larger than that if you're spending other money there. But for right now, we're talking about your most impacted and distressed areas, unmet recovery needs, target area. And it must meet at least one of the most impacted, each area must meet at least one of the most impacted, one distressed, and one unmet recovery need criteria described in Appendix G. Obviously, we're putting this together way too fast. And the CDBG NDR grant funds can only be used to assist these qualified areas. And then we talk for your NDRC overall proposal, which is beyond the factor minimum and beyond the Appendix G threshold. Your target area is the overall area you propose for resilience. And another way to think of it is your mid-earn areas plus areas you add because of supporting leverage, because of long-term commitments that you're making. These are your greater resilience areas. But they're not about disaster recovery, so we can't fund them. Okay, let's go to the next one. This question, we don't answer why often enough, in my opinion. So why is the mid-earn target area definition important beyond what we said about the law? So the law says most impacted, and we need applicants, not HUD. We're giving you the chance to make the choices and demonstrate what is most impacted in your jurisdiction. HUD makes the decision most of the time. When we do a formula allocation, we tell you what was the most impacted. In this case, we're asking you. And you can't, because of that, you can't propose every single county that was declared. You need to tell us some way, some reasonable showing of what's most. And we follow the Appendix G directions to demonstrate most impacted. Because the amounts of housing and business impact that we put in for the threshold in Appendix G are really calibrated to be more appropriate at the census tract level, not at a full county level or at a multiple county level. 20 severely damaged houses scattered across a state that has all of its counties declared is not going to be a most impacted area. So it's a calibration issue. And it's also, as a policy writer, we're looking for a fundable scale for projects that we can reasonably fund and get compelling projects in your eligible geography with, I hate to say it this way, just $1 billion spread around the whole country. So these are sort of some why reasons, if you're wondering why we're doing this. We're trying to meet the law and also meet some policy objectives. Okay, next slide. Sorry. Meg's working on other stuff. Okay, so we got there are a lot of issues we saw around what is the sub-county level. And I'm going to signal to you right here that this is also a place where the technical amendment that I have in my hand is going to play through. A county is a county or county equivalent that received the major disaster declaration from FEMA. Most of you don't know what I'm talking about because you have counties, but we also have these other parishes, boroughs, independent cities, District of Columbia, educational attendance areas. There may be something else in Alaska, I don't know, but it's at what got the declaration from FEMA, with the exception of we consider tribal areas a sub-county level for reasons of our own, not because we think tribes are actually sub-county hierarchically, but because it simplifies and deals with some other issues we have related to tribal areas. Tribal areas are sub-county levels for purposes of qualification for the most impacted and distressed. But at a sub-county level, we would also consider a census tract.
Or multiple census tracts.
Right, and we're allowing a group of aggregated contiguous census tracts that together are still sub-county, a smaller geographic area within a county. What I'm going to tell you here is a list of things from tribal areas on down. The way the notice is currently written, there's only two choices, census designated place and census tract. We're going to put a such as in front of that probably, or something along those lines, because that was meant to be, we're looking for a sub-county area. We're not necessarily trying to drive you to a particular kind because it doesn't work for all four kinds of things, housing, economic, environmental, so that is a technical change. And this slide gives you an idea of where we're going. The county equivalents, like the independent cities that got their own declarations, like the District of Columbia, are not sub-county areas. They are, because they're eligible applicants in their own right, so we're looking for them to give us at the level of census tracts or a group of contiguous census tracts. It's got to be something that we can get the data at that level, that it's not all jumbled up, that it's easily available and we can get it and agree it's data. Okay, go ahead to the next one. So can a county be a sub-county was an odd question that we kind of actually dealt with in this because there was an applicant who figured out how to make a most impacted and distress showing for every single sub-county area, every tract within the county, but they did each one separately. And they did each one separately for most impacted and distressed correctly. So there is somebody out there who pulled this off, and we got this answer. We said, you can't aggregate most impacted and distressed data for a whole bunch of different groups of sub-county areas across your state. But you can make a demonstration for each census tract or each group of census tracts that makes up a place and basically use up all the census tracts in the county if they each of the sub-county areas meets the most impacted and distressed, logically and reasonably. And the case that I am mentioning actually had, each one did have enough damage and in a couple of categories, and each one of the tracts had a brownfield. So, and a documented brownfield, and so they got through on distress. So that was an interesting case. So it is possible to get a whole county through, but you're going to have to document at the sub-county level that it was really, a county-wide impact event. Again, this is a scale problem with the way we set the thresholds for the data. Okay? And if you can get it for one, you can get it for all in the sub-county. This is not hard data to get. Okay? On most impacted and distressed responses, your narrative response this is just driving home again that we're looking for place name and our census tract code, and this is now, we're saying such as, if you are going on the environmental, we know that sometimes you're going to be naming features for us. We signaled in those responses that we had thought of that, but it's, of course, makes perfect sense to us now. And so take a look when we reissue the guidance later this week, and I think that'll help the environmental factor. But for housing, there's no reason you wouldn't just go ahead with place names or census tract codes. And we'll talk more about unmet recovery need. But again, this is an and. Most impacted, an area has to be most impacted and distressed and have unmet recovery need to qualify for funding from the grant. And we need to we have to have the data either through a link or by just submitting it, supporting the framing of unmet recovery needs as described in the NOFA. I'm going to tell you right now, a few of you gave us passwords to data, and the passwords expired after like 10 days. They expired before we could complete your review. Please don't do that again. Just as a technical note, if we say we're going to take a period of time, please don't have the password expire until like 15 or 20 days after that, because we're doing quality assurance, quality control, and we don't necessarily download all the data until we're all the way through the quality assurance piece. So if that's a problem for anybody, send me a note at resilientrecovery@hud.gov, but be careful about those expiring passwords on data. And we do guard privacy. We're very careful about it. So we're not sharing it. It's not available to other people. We've got it in a locked SharePoint where we do download it if we have to. Okay. The acceptable data sources are defined in Appendix G. You must use those data sources. If we're more general, then you give us what you think is the best one. If we're specific, we mean that data source. In Phase 2, you will get to update Phase 1 mid-earn responses as necessary, and we're just going to tell you that we're looking for, we'll give more points. So this is about threshold and about points. We're going to give more points to more accurate, detailed, and robust responses as we progress through this. Okay, Lynsey, we had something else, right? A request from Rockefeller Foundation?
Yes. So this is Lynsey from OER, and Rockefeller has asked that they are looking for applicants to send the submission that you actually sent to HUD, as well as HUD's response to that submission. And please send that to resilience with a CE.academy@rockfound.org. And they're going to use your submission as well as the HUD response to the submission to help tailor technical assistance moving forward.
Yeah, because of the Reform Act, HUD is not allowed to give these to Rockefeller. Only you can. As Lynsey just told me, you're the holder of the privilege of who you give them to, and not us. So until after the competition is completely over, there's a embargo on us releasing it. But if you give it to them, it'll really help them tailor the technical assistance, so they asked. I also want to let you know that FAQ 35 is out of date, not because it's wrong, it's just incomplete now that we've done the reviews, and we're going to be updating FAQ 35, which is specifically on, I believe, sub-county areas. And if you submitted and you got a note about deficiencies, you are most emphatically not alone. we graded really hard on purpose because there's going to be a big team of people in doing these reviews in Phase 1, and they're going to be working directly off of checklists. And they really, really, really we wanted to make sure that if you're interested enough to submit, you'd make it through. Please don't give up. We saw a lot of really, really cool ideas that still had some deficiencies on the data front or didn't completely respond, and we're pretty excited about what we saw. Okay, Meg, do we have any questions in the queue?
Yes, somebody had asked for a clarification about what has to be done in order for a proposal to be scored in Phase 1, as far as what, I think just restating how you meet the threshold requirement as it relates to at least most impacted, distress, and unmet recovery needs.
Okay. If I understand the question, what you have to do to get scored in Phase 1 is get past the threshold. You need to get one area past the threshold. That's not guaranteeing you're going to pick up a lot of points or anything, but it means that HUD will score your application if you demonstrate one area is most impacted and distressed and has unmet recovery need, and by demonstrating that means you also have to give us the data or backup information, supporting information that we asked for. And to be honest, a lot of people, I think, made the case where, you know, if somebody was just standing and telling you, we were willing to believe it, but the data wasn't there to back it up, and we cannot accept assertion. We are not allowed to allocate funds because it says we have to allocate based on best available data. So tell us, this is what the best data we have available. Here's the data. If we say engineering report, we'll take any report that says an engineer prepared it, and it covers what we'd expect in an engineering report. If it's a project worksheet and it says an engineer prepared it and it has all the information we asked for, then that's an engineering report. But if you give us that, if you give us that and don't say that an engineer prepared it, we're stuck. You know, I mean, it's an engineering report when it's prepared by an engineer and it tells you what the repair needs are. And we hated to be that picky. There was actually one that was a problem for. I saw an earlier question, too, about the block group census tract thing.
Question is there any calibration issue regarding data at the census block group area? For example, HUD LMI percent is at the block group level and not tracked.
Yes, percentages I'll let Todd speak to. Most of the time, if you submitted a block group to demonstrate a tract, if it was just raw numbers, like you're telling us there were 20 severely damaged homes in a block group, we were okay with the tract being demonstrated. But if you're doing percentages, those of you who have ever tried to game the low and moderate income area benefit know that there's it's not just calibration, it's not answering the question. So we had a few where block groups were submitted for the LMI one, and I believe we didn't accept it because it wasn't the entire target area. People told us that the target area was a county or a sub-county area, but they only gave us one or two block groups inside that instead of the whole thing.
Right, so there's two, this is Todd, Richardson. There's two ways to look at this.
Yeah.
One is if you're identifying an area that's multiple block groups, then you need to sum those block groups together to determine the low-mod benefit, the percentage. But if you are saying our target area is a single block group within this tract, that is okay. We'll accept that as a sub-county area, and if that's a block group and that's the only part of that census tract, that block group that is low-mod, that's fine. That counts as distressed. So I'm not sure if that's the question, but you need to give us the total areas for
the target area. So if you're telling us it's multiple contiguous tracts, then that's what you've got to talk to us about for the LMI area. But it still has to be a sub-county area. So slide up. What else?
There's a question about most impacted. For that category, for infrastructure, it states that there needs to be $2 million in damage. Does there need to be $2 million left in unrepaired damage, or just total damage in that area?
There doesn't have, for the most impacted and distressed, which is where we are today, this is about total damage, not what's left over to be repaired. It's about how hard were you hit in that sub-county area, or if you were in a most impacted county, in the county area. The other interesting thing that a lot of people missed was in the environmental one. For most impacted, the question was, what was the impact to the environment? Not necessarily, I mean, a lot of people gave us a project there and said there was an impact to a project, and not necessarily talking about the impact to the environment. And the environmental degradation one is, and most impacted, is about what was the damage to the environment. I know that can be tough to estimate, but several places pulled it off. Sometimes it could be that there was damage to a water and sewer facility that then overflowed, and estimating the damage to the water and sewer facility tells you both the infrastructure one and the environmental one. So, but we are looking for total damage in that one area. We're not allowing aggregation across sub-county areas. So if you have each sub-county area you're trying to qualify, if you're trying to qualify multiple ones, each one has to have that $2 million for most impacted.
And it's important that that damage is the result of a disaster.
On the, well, for most impacted, the threshold is $2 million.
Yeah.
Right.
The unmet repair need is $400,000.
Summed across all of the possible target areas that you've gotten through.
Right.
So we allow aggregation on unmet recovery need, which we'll be talking about Thursday, but you may not aggregate for most impacted. We're looking for straight up, boom, impact for most impacted.
So the next question, did the fact that my jurisdiction did not submit a letter by November 3rd, and I assume that's for the 45-day response, count against this for the Phase 1 application?
No, not at all. These are actually set aside, gone as if they did not exist, except now you've got them and you have some additional instructions if you did submit. I would say if you didn't submit, you may want to cozy up to some people who got some letters and take a look at them and see how we reacted. We'll be putting as much out as we can in FAQs to the extent that we can view multiple failures or multiple deficiencies on a particular point to be essentially a question to us that we need to answer. And we're going to do this technical amendment, and everybody should keep their eyes out for this. It'll post on grants.gov. We have
Yeah, so there's a question about the mid-earn target area, whether that target area can be contiguous census tracts that cross two declared counties.
No, you have to you have to be a sub-county area within one county, even if they touch across the boundary. You'd qualify them each separately. It's a calibration thing. Todd's sitting here nodding no, so he's our data guy.
So another geographical question. Would geography definitions in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, local area unemployment statistics count to sub-county, even if there's not a direct overlay to tract or block group?
Yes.
That was easy. Todd says yes. I think we'll pick that one up for FAQs because I actually have seen that one before.
Okay, the next question.
Meg's working on getting us the next question. So, if you have a question, type it in. We'll go to the phones at some point, but right now we're still getting questions. So what's the next one?
So the next one is if you have a project that needs mid-earn, I understand that can be funded, but is the resiliency you would add, i.e. strengthening the power grid, funded?
If you demonstrated that, so there's two ways to do this. We're not at Phase 2 yet, but so in Phase 1, you're just giving us an idea or concept. If you have a project that, because we're not at project yet, so this is really a Phase 2 question, but I'm going to tackle it. If you have a project in a mid-earn area, because the project doesn't meet mid-earn, the area meets mid-earn, we can fund something to assist that area. If your project is strengthening your power grid and your power grid was not at all affected by the disaster, or you didn't lose power, you cannot make tieback, you're in trouble. We are not a pure resilience or mitigation program. We are a recovery program. If you had power failures and you got the power back on, but you see the weakness in your power grid as causing issues with your economic revitalization following your recovery, and you can make that case, then you may be able to strengthen your power grid. There are ways through this to projects that protect your recovery, promote economic development, or economic revitalization, which is one of the purposes of the law. But making tieback for that kind of a project, just a straight energy grid project, it's one of the trickier problems to make tieback for a project. This isn't about meeting most impacted and distressed, though, so we're probably confusing some people who are listening to this. So the answer is it's theoretically possible. It's one of the more complex cases that you'll have to make, and you need to look at that definition of tieback and really think about it. But first, you have to establish most impacted and distressed. You have to establish unmet recovery needs, and then you're going to have to establish somehow that dealing with your power grid and protecting it, or creating what do they call the power islands, where you can take yourself off the grid and turn yourself on, uninterruptedly or something like that. Is a tieback to disaster or protecting your recovery and your revitalization. Okay. It's a long logical chain.
Another most impacted question, and it relates back to the environmental degradation discussion before. In New Mexico, a burn scar resulting from a forest fire resulted in a flood from a severe storm and a PDD.
Presidential Declared Declaration.
Presidential Declared Declaration. Can the burn scar be part of the environmental degradation since it isn't specifically part of the presidentially declared disaster?
I love that New Mexico one, by the way. I was one of the ones who got to read that, and I've been going around talking about hydrophobic burn scars ever since I read that. That was new for me. So you had a forest fire that had environmental degradation. I don't remember whether the fire had a presidential declaration or not, but the flood did. So walking across the environmental aspects that are in most impacted, distressed, and unmet recovery need, if the fire did not have a major declaration, because I can't remember if it did or not, if it didn't, then that pre-existing burn scar is clearly part of distress, because it made the flood worse. Now, you didn't show me data that proved it, but it did make the flood worse. And you're going to have to basically prove it. So it's got distressed. If the fire was part of a declaration, a major declaration, not just a fire declaration, then you can possibly get it in under the most impacted as well by showing the damage to the environment, that the cost of that damage to the environment exceed the $2 million threshold under most impacted. Is that the right way to go, Todd?
That's right, but I think that the main point here is for most impacted, assuming that the fire was not presidentially declared,
right,
the flooding, you need to show the most impacted from the flooding.
From the flooding, right.
So if that's the question is that you actually have to tie it to the presidentially declared declaration. That's right. Statutory, we can't.
But if the way to deal with the flooding and protect the community and protect the recovery is to move over and deal with the burn scar, then, that is a chain of logic that you could build to get there. It's a clear protecting the recovery kind of argument. And burn scars take a long time to heal. I don't remember what New Mexico told us, but I know it's a long time when they're created. So,
but for the purpose of the most impacted and distressed, you're saying
right.
it's the flood that has to
right.
have caused the damage for making the case.
If the fire wasn't a major.
Right.
If the fire was a major, you have a slightly different.
Oh, no.
Sorry about that. I don't know what I am ringing. So it would be an interesting case too, because if the fire's in a different county, we can actually, to assist your most impacted and distressed area from the flood, if it means doing work a county over or in another location, we actually need to, we're still trying to deal with that question and figure it out, but we're pretty sure that that's possible. But we would have to look at the full range of effects, and you might want to have some leverage in that kind of a deal if that's, once we get to phase 2, if it gets that far.
Okay, so this sounds like possibly the distress, the separations from the quarterly workforce indicators count as people losing jobs. Is that from most impacted for economic or?
That's definitely a Todd question.
So I'm going to have to look at those data and see if what level of geography those are provided. So I don't know the answer to this question, but we can put that in an FAQ.
FAQ. We'll get that one out. So we need to get that question noted. Got that question noted? Somebody who's taking notes for me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So the next one is in their response from HUD had indicated the guidance would be forthcoming regarding documenting prior environmental distress for the purpose of the distress threshold. Will this be included in this week's guidance?
Yes. The problem what happened in the Appendix G is right now the way it's written, it's ambiguous about whether brownfields are the only way through it. We are fixing that paragraph to be clearer, and we gave that saying that keep watch. It's definitely going to be part of the technical amendment.
Okay. So the next question: can you clarify on the distressed environmental degradation threshold for what constitutes prior to the disaster environmental distress?
Well, right now what the Appendix G it talks about is brownfields. The other things that we have now seen are prior and ongoing land subsidence, prior and ongoing erosion, movement of rivers through contaminated areas, and sometimes just major movements of rivers into previously developed or away from previously developed areas. Either one can be a problem. I'm trying to remember what else we saw in prior environmental distress, but it's not something that was caused by the disaster. It was something that was there when the disaster hit. And the reason we put that in is because the research literature shows us that for certain kinds of environmental distress, severe environmental distress, pre-existing a disaster, when a major disaster hits, those communities have a much harder time recovering, and the amount of funds that are generally provided by insurance and that the population has and that the federal government supplies just aren't enough to drive recovery in those areas. So we're looking for something pretty severe that's retarding your recovery.
Okay. Next question is, if a data source was accepted via the threshold letter, and I'm assuming that means this 45-day review response, is there a possibility that a different reviewer will not accept that data source?
Well, we're going to run all the data sources through the same reviewers. And in this case, Todd and his able people, we're looking at them pretty seriously. So if we accepted it before a data source, we're probably going to accept it again. That one is going to be pretty stable. Okay. It's rigorous enough or it isn't.
Okay. Just to clarify, a sub-county area can be a census tract. Each census tract would need to meet mid-earn, correct?
Well, to be clear, you can actually provide an aggregation of census tracts
So long as it's sub-county.
As long as it's sub-county. So you don't have to do each, if you've got an aggregation of census tracts, you don't have to qualify each of them individually. You could qualify 2 or 3 or 4 census tracts together that are sub-county.
The other qualifier in that is we actually have a couple places that have multiple counties that have multiple declarations. Don't group them if they were affected by different disasters. We have a couple of counties that were affected on one side by a flood and on another side by a major fire. Don't group the fire and flood ones together because you're not going to be able to push them through most impacted and distressed really in a logical way. You make 2 groupings in your county and get 2 sub-county areas or something like that. That's pretty exceptional, but I actually spotted a couple of those moving through. I think Roundup, Montana may be one of those. Okay. What else we got, Meg?
In choosing our phase 1 direction, they need some clarity around meeting a national objective. The question is, does the national objective need to apply to just the mid-earn target area or the beneficiaries of the recovery resilience work in phase 2?
That's a good question. First of all, I'd like to make it really clear that all 3 national objectives are on the table. It's not just low mod. We also have slum blight and urgent need. You need to read Appendix A when you do get down to your project work. And look at Appendix E about the possibilities for waiver requests and the standards. That said, what the national objective is going to need to be met for the activities that are funded with CDBG NDR. So that is the mid-earn or part of the mid-earn area that is actually benefiting from the CDBG NDR assistance. If you go to a bigger area and fund it with something else, that's not our problem. We're not going to force the entire area covered by your long-term commitment, for example, to meet a national objective. Just the part we fund, just like regular CDBG. We're looking at the benefit driven by what we fund.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. And this is another, I think, where we're need to clarify again the project versus target area conflation problem.
Yeah.
The question is, are the most impacted and distressed threshold requirements specific to a project? In other words, do we need to meet the most impacted and distressed threshold for each project proposed?
We are not talking about projects in this phase at all. In fact, we're going to eject that word, I think, mostly from Appendix G.
I don't think you saw it anywhere in the slides we showed you.
Yes.
Did projects show up?
We are talking about most impacted and distressed areas that have unmet recovery needs. A project that you propose to be funded with the CDBG NDR grant funds has to serve, assist, help with economic revitalization, restoration of infrastructure, disaster recovery, and resiliency. The part we are funding is going to have to primarily assist that most impacted and distressed area with unmet recovery needs. The project is not most impacted and distressed. The project serves the most impacted and distressed unmet recovery need area. Here's the ambiguity, right? So you have a project that serves that area, but your overall proposal in phase 1 or phase 2 and your overall idea can be for a much larger area. But we're asking you to then think of our money as seed money, and you're going to be driving, toward some other financing or actions that you're going to take that will drive resilience in a larger area. So our funded projects will assist the most impacted and distressed unmet recovery need areas. And your overall proposal is going to, at minimum, serve that area, but it might be bigger. If you want to get all the points for leverage and long-term commitment, it's going to be bigger.
But it's just that only CDBG awarded funds can only be spent in the target areas that you qualify.
Right.
As most impacted, distressed with unmet recovery.
For the benefit of, not necessarily in.
For the benefit of, right,
yeah.
Exactly. For the benefit of project areas qualified
right.
under most impacted and distressed with unmet recovery needs.
So still confused.
The burn scar people are still confused. The only thing Appendix G accounts for in environmental distress is brownfield.
I know. So what I know that. It's supposed, all right, I'm going to talk a little out of school. It's supposed to say, for example, brownfield. It's a technical amendment. Keep watch. We know that. We are very frustrated because we actually have a draft that says, for example, that didn't make it out of the building. And was meant to. So let me see the whole burn scar question again. Can you scroll down? I lost track of it.
It says that it seems to include burn scars, or in their case, coastal land loss, and will brownfields be the only way to document environmental distress?
They are not going to be the only way to document environmental distress, and we're really talking about severe environmental distress here. So We've had discussion of the burn scars, by the way, at least the ones that we saw in our submissions, were not actually designated brownfields yet. They weren't on any list. And we did go hunting, or in a case, coastal land loss. Oh, that brings me to a point about data that please help the reviewers. If you submit to us a link to an entire data set, without honing in on and telling us exactly what to look at, you can bet that we're going to miss your point. We need you, when you send us a link to data, to send us a link to the data that tells your story. If we ask you for the low-mod summary data, the lower moderate income summary data, tell us the exact census tracts to look up, or when we click a link on your data, have us looking directly at the exact data we need. Don't make us look at the whole data set that HUD puts out there for the whole country to try to figure out which tracts you're looking at, because your application needs to sell your most impacted and distressed area and convince us clearly and thoroughly. And all of us hit submissions that just gave us these huge data dumps, and we couldn't figure out what piece we were supposed to be using. Help us out. Help us get your point. Communication is like part of the job you guys have to do.
We shouldn't have to make your case for you.
Right.
That's going to be the struggle.
We do really want to, but we may miss it.
We won't be able to show that we treated all applications fairly if we have to make your argument for you.
Right.
So that's a problem for us. So there's a question about whether a statewide or state agency project can be funded with a grant. They're assuming that that eligible counties or sub-counties would have a direct benefit.
There are very, very few eligible applicants in the pool who could possibly do a statewide plan, but here's the rub, and why the answer is actually no. The law says most impacted and distressed areas. You have to choose and tell us what the most impacted and distressed areas in your state, or in your, if you're an eligible applicant, in your, that's a city or county, in your jurisdiction, inside your jurisdiction are. You have to choose and tell us which one's most impacted. If you're doing a plan to determine which is most impacted and how to deal with that, and you want to do statewide too, you have to put supporting leverage in the game to pay for the non-most impacted areas. Most is in the law, and we have to read the law so that most means something. So it can't mean the whole state. It must mean a most impacted, most distressed area.
Okay, so the next question was whether we were saying that all impact has to be demonstrated by an engineering report?
No. We said we linked to the engineering report specifically for
infrastructure.
For infrastructure, I believe.
And I think
degradation.
And some degradation.
And some degradation. So, but not all. So you need to look where we say it specifically. That's what we're specifically looking for.
So So, for example, on page 6.
Come closer, because, you know, you're so far away. Oh, I see.
On page 6 of Appendix G, for housing, this is an example. Under Housing B1, if you aren't running a CDBG, DR, or other recovery housing program currently, briefly explain why prior allocations, this is, I'm looking at.
No, you're looking at the wrong way. It's not housing. It's in infrastructure. But it's in B.
Infrastructure states that you need to demonstrate a sub-county area estimated at 2 million or greater, and you have to provide an engineering report.
Yeah.
Housing, though, requires a concentration of housing damage in a sub-county area due to the eligible disaster, and it says that applicants may also submit local data provided that the data show concentrated damage meeting the standard and that HUD agrees with the validity of the data if you decide not to use the data source that's provided relative to housing. So that's not an engineering report.
Yeah.
That's other data that you can provide to us that demonstrates that there's either a minimum of 100 homes with serious damage or a minimum of 20 homes. Oh, wait, sorry. Causing damage to a minimum of 100 homes or serious damage to a minimum of 20 homes. So that's the threshold for demonstrating most impacted housing, and HUD has provided a list of census tracts that meet that threshold, but you may also use your own data, which is not necessarily an engineering report, to meet this particular criteria.
Right, so that's what I said about taking a look at Appendix G, a careful look for what data we're specifically asking for. Because we looked for that, and for example, one of the key ones is a fair number of applicants gave us engineering reports, and that did great, but they skipped giving us sources and uses, so we couldn't tell if it was unfunded when we got to unmet recovery need. We don't have that problem on the most impacted side, but then it was, you know, and so they got most impacted, but they didn't get the last bit, which was the unmet recovery need. So it's like you have to have all the pieces, all the dots, all the sentences in a row. I think you skipped one that I was kind of interested in, Meg, up above that.
This one?
The lack of vegetative growth since a fire disaster.
I was reading it because it was unmet need. I was going to answer.
Oh, it's an unmet need, right.
We're doing mid today.
We're doing mid today.
I put it down at the end of it.
Okay, she's keeping me disciplined and focused on mid.
Stay on mid. So we had a question about compiling all the damages and data for each county or sub-county across all eligible disaster declarations. That's their plan. How is it possible to break out threshold data for individual disasters? Our county's damages are cumulative over 7 years.
7 disasters.
7 disasters, excuse me, yes.
Yeah, better not be 7 years.
7 disasters.
So this is interesting because if you have 7 disasters that occurred one on top of each other in pretty much the same year, yeah, you're going to not be able to tease it apart. But we have situations where something happened in 2011, a totally different thing happened in 2012, and a totally different thing happened again in 2013. And for this particular one I know of, they also got hit again in 2014. But we only really care about 2011, 12, and 13 for the purposes of competition. If you cannot tease apart for individual eligible disasters for that time frame, 2010, 11, and 12, and that truly is your best available data, make your case. You can't, I mean, if you really had every same sub-county area hit by all 7 disasters, you have some sub-county areas that are hit by all 7, and you can't get the damage data apart, make your case that you can't. But this is a long time. It's a 3-year period. So I would look really hard at it. We're looking for most impacted by the disasters in that time period. Theoretically, we could sew together 2011, 12, and 13 for a place that was hit by all of them. That's possible. I didn't see that in any of the submissions, so you're going to have to talk to us. You certainly cannot, and this is directed directly at our Gulf Coast recovery grantees, please don't reference Katrina, because that's not in the time period. You can make a case on Katrina in the environmental degradation, the distress factor, if you need to, but it isn't going to work for most impacted, and it's not going to work for unmet recovery need.
Okay, so this is the clarification. asking if costs associated with improving the resiliency of a community can or cannot be included in the unmet need estimate to satisfy the Phase 1 threshold, unless you can show that improvement is necessitated by the damage from the disaster.
Yeah, somebody here really wants to get us to Thursday faster. This is about most impacted and distress, but what the NOFA says is that we're doing resilient recovery projects. You have to have a project that ties back to an unmet recovery need before you can do resilience. If you lost a whole lot of housing, for example, and you decide to do an economic revitalization project, you're going to have to tie it back to the damage you had. Sometimes that is a perfectly logical response, to try to drive your area into greater economic revitalization and assume the market will take care of the housing. That might be an appropriate response, but you're going to have to make the case, and that'll make you more resilient because of that. So the resilience, yes, does have to tie back to your mid-earn, your most impacted and distress, unmet recovery need area. It's got to somehow address an identified unmet recovery need, what you're proposing. And then a recovery need can include economic revitalization, and it can include resilience. But that's a Phase 2 problem.
So now you can answer your
now
the lack of vegetation growth since a fire disaster count as an unmet need, if you want, or we can wait till Thursday.
No. I mean, this is an interesting one. I've seen a lot of fires over time, including some ones that were bad enough to be major disasters. So if you have a fire major disaster and it's wiped out all your vegetation, and that is somehow causing you a recovery problem or a revitalization problem, or it's messing with your, you can't do a resilient recovery without the vegetation, then that should be a quantifiable damage, degradation from the disaster that you can get into most impacted, and then talk about your unmet recovery need from there.
Okay, so we did have a question.
But if it wasn't a major disaster, then it's not on the table for most impacted and distressed. And right.
So we had a question about whether a FEMA project worksheet would meet the requirements for an engineering report with estimated repair amount, and I believe the question was answered sort of piggybacking on another question. The answer being yes, it would count if you say in the project worksheet. The project worksheet says that the repair
or the cover letter
and the worksheet itself were prepared by an engineer.
Right. We actually got a couple that it looks like they might have been prepared by an engineer, but we literally read them line by line and could not tell. They didn't actually, we're from Missouri, you got to show us. It didn't say this was prepared by an engineer. It said the engineer is a contact, and we're like, help us out here.
Okay, so
but we also had several that said they were prepared by engineers, and we accepted them.
So were there any other written questions? The other written questions were questions relative to Rockefeller assistance, which we will cover before the end of the session when we talk about resources that are available to applicants. But were there any other questions in the Q&A? Or actually, George, are there any folks with their hands raised in the verbal queue?
Hi, Meg. It doesn't look like anybody has indicated that they'd like to ask a question over the phone. Just a reminder, folks, if you do want to do that, at the bottom of the participant panel on the right-hand side, there's a little hand button you can press, and we'll unmute you or have you unmute yourself.
Okay, so then I think that gets us to the questions about the Rockefeller assistance. We have some folks asking if we could restate what we should send to them. Sure, go ahead, Lynsey.
Sure, so what Rockefeller is looking for you to send them is the submission that you sent to HUD for your unmet needs.
For your 45-day
threshold review. as well as the HUD response letter that you received so that they can compare what you sent versus what the HUD response was. And once again, you can send that to resilience, and that's spelled resilience.academy@rockbound.org. And once again, that's going to help to tailor the technical assistance moving forward. And then we will also ask that they provide a read receipt for any submissions that they do receive. So if you haven't received one yet, one will be coming.
Great. So as you see here, and we will be sending out a PDF of the slides from this webinar, and also we'll be posting the recording. So you can look forward to getting those. But you see here, we also have links to, hopefully you're very familiar with these by now.
You're welcome, Wendy.
Huh?
I was just talking to Wendy. She
The
just said thank you.
Yes. The grants.gov website where you can download the NOFA. The NOFA website itself on HUD Exchange with a lot of resources, including the webinar series that has recordings, slides, transcripts, everything you could ever hope for. Data resources about the data that we are providing relative to disaster, this NOFA that we've referred to today as well. Also the Resilient Recovery website that has a whole lot of information on and research on disaster resilience that you can use as you're looking into ways to rebuild resiliently.
Do we have any other questions from anybody? Anybody want to give us another question in the...
There are no more questions.
There are no more questions.
We have exhausted the
Well, we are always there at the Resilient Recovery at HUD.gov mailbox.
It looks like we might have just had a few more.
Oh, there we go. Somebody came in.
No, it's just people saying thank you to us.
Ah.
You're welcome.
Yes, we're happy to do that. We learned a lot really, really fast, drinking from the fire hose.
So we will be back on Thursday.
And we'll be back on Thursday to talk specifically about unmet recovery needs and how to get through that that particular threshold alone. And we're working as fast as we can on doing this technical amendment. As I said, it'll go out through grants.gov. And those of you who got your NOFA through grants.gov and click the box that let it send you email updates, we'll get an email update. Everybody else should just, like, lurk. We'll get it up as soon as we can, as soon as I can get the signatures. Todd agrees to it, don't you, Todd?
Always.
Yes, there we go. Well, thank you very, very much. This has been a really interesting webinar. We got a lot of great questions, and we'll be back Thursday.
Oh, just as a reminder, if you have, just a second. If you have any questions going forward about the NOFA itself, technical questions about what's in the NOFA, what the requirements of the NOFA are, you need to send them to this resilientrecovery@HUD.gov.
Right.
And someone from HUD will respond.
Mostly me.
Usually it's Jessie, because we all have to ask her anyway.
Sometimes it's Meg, sometimes it's Jen. But, yeah.
So, yeah, make sure that if you have any follow-up questions or also show up on Thursday when we'll be covering unmet recovery need, which I think is the harder one.
Yes.
So we'll look forward to that in 2 days now.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, George.
Bye now. Have a good one. We'll see everyone on Thursday.